So in this video, we are going to review chemical and physical properties. We're also going to review chemical and physical changes. We covered this in grade 9, but it's really important to understand the difference because it's something we're going to be reviewing in every lab. So let's start by reminding ourselves what matter is. Just a reminder that chemistry is actually the study of matter. So matter is anything that has mass and takes up space. Matter also has observable and measurable qualities. We use both physical and chemical qualities in order to identify a substance. So we use physical and chemical properties in order to actually study and describe matter. Let's start by talking about physical properties. Physical property is a description of a substance that does not involve forming a new substance. So it's you actually describing that substance without actually making any changes to it. Physical properties, there's two different types of physical properties. There's qualitative and there's quantitative. So qualitative is determined by your senses. We talked about that a little bit in the last lesson. So it might be sight, smell, touch. Quantitative physical properties uses actual numerical numbers. So it might be the weight, height, density. There's also something called solubility that in grade 12 chemistry, you can have an actual number assigned to it as well too. And a few other quantitative physical properties you'll see crop up in chemistry the more that you study it. Let's take a look at some examples of physical properties. So remember, these are describing words that you want to use to describe your reactants before you do a chemical reaction. So you might describe the color, texture, density, smell, solubility, that's whether or not it dissolves in water. You might describe the clarity, opaque being you can't see through it at all, transparent being you can totally see through it, and translucent is you can kind of see through it, but not a clear image. State is a great example of a physical property. So is it a solid, liquid, or a gas? Luster is how shiny or dull something is. And malleability is the ability to actually be hammered out into sheets. Now let's take a look at chemical properties. So chemical properties, again, describe a substance. They're characteristics that can be measured by performing a chemical reaction. So in order to judge a chemical property, you are going to make a change. You're going to change that substance. That means you always want to measure physical properties before chemical properties. Measure your physical properties without changing your substance, because once you've measured your chemical properties, you have a new substance and you can't go back. Chemical changes are usually irreversible. So examples of chemical properties might be flammability, reactivity, toxicity, the stability, or its reactivity with other chemicals. Let's take a look at chemical and physical changes. So a lot of times in chemistry, we'll ask, did a chemical change take place? So let's look at the difference between them. Types of changes, we're going to start with a physical change. So a change in which no new substance is formed is a physical change. That means that the molecules have essentially stayed the same. Many can be reversed, like evaporation. Some cannot be reversed. So sometimes you can't put things back together, but it's a good rule of thumb. If you're not sure if something is a physical change, ask, could I reverse it or not? Changes in state are very common physical changes like melting and evaporating. So it's one of the ones that's a physical change that you actually see in energy change as well too. So just remember, anytime you're changing state, so going from a solid to a liquid to a gas, that is an example of a physical change. Now let's take a look at chemical changes. A chemical change is when you have formed a new substance. Those new substances will have different properties, and they're very difficult to reverse. We're going to look at one example of a reversible chemical change. Otherwise, they're all considered to be not reversible. So the easiest way to tell if something is a chemical or a physical change is to look for the signs of a chemical change. So we studied these in grade 9. Let's remind ourselves, because most of the labs we're going to be looking for these signs of a chemical change. So the first sign of a chemical change is if heat is produced or absorbed. So if your substance feels hot or cold to the touch, then you do have a sign of a chemical change. If light or sound is produced, then you're also going to have a sign of a chemical change. If you have a color change, so if you've seen a color change and a new unexpected color, not dyeing something, then it is a sign of a chemical change. Great example of this is a Statue of Liberty. Statue of Liberty used to be a nice copper color. That copper became oxidized, and now we have this green color here. Gas or bubbles produced. This is the most common sign of a chemical change that we're going to see in our lab. So anytime that you see a fizzing or gas bubbles produced, that means that a new substance, that gas, has been formed. It's a sign of a chemical change. And another common one we'll see in this lab is if a precipitate forms. So what a precipitate is when you have two liquids that are brought together and an unexpected solid forms. So this white cloudy substance here is a precipitate, that's a solid, and if you actually let this settle, it'll actually settle to the bottom of the liquid. So those are your signs of a chemical change. That's what you're looking for in order to identify if we have a chemical change. And remember, at the start of a lab, you always want to describe both your physical properties first and then your chemical properties. All right, next video, we're going to keep continuing on with our review of grade 9 science.